So my name is Brandon Wilson. I'm the Executive Director for the Historic Preservation Commission. I've actually worked for the city for more decades than I'm going to tell you today. But I do have a kind of a long period with the city, and during that time, it's as a city planner, which is what my training is in, it has been so rewarding to watch how much this community has changed. I recognize a lot of the faces here today, so I know a number of you have also been here for a while and have watched some of those changes. Some of you, even longer than I have been here because you grew up here. He came all the way from Florida, by the way. But there are a lot of things that have gone on in the city that are mostly for the better, I think. When I first came here, I have to admit that it had a different name. Okay. This is actually not going to help you with that. This is actually for the TV. Wishful thinking. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so if you can't, raise your hand, because there's nothing worse than not understanding what's being said. So in any case, there's a lot of changes that have occurred since, I would say, 1980 is when I actually came and working here. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at today is what those changes are and anything that people can share about what they know about those changes. Many of you, I hope, live in the area or have lived in the area and can actually share some stories about people that you knew, things that were different, stories that were here. The purpose of a Jane's Walk is different than the walking tours that we do periodically. As many of you know, May is Preservation Month in the city of Somerville, and we do a whole host of events every year. This is the first one, the kickoff. And this Jane's Walk is actually more to bring people together that want to learn more about a specific area and actually have either lived there or spent time there or want to hear what other people who have done that know about it. So this is not a tour where we're going to be talking a lot. Ed Gordon, I want to introduce as well. Ed Gordon is an architectural historian who is almost part of the city staff now because I've hired him so many times to do walking tours for me. And he's done a lot of surveying, which is how I first met Ed, about a lot of properties in the city. So normally when he does a walking tour, he does most of the talking. I chime in and such. Today it's the reverse. You're going to do most of the talking, and we're going to chime in every once in a while. And the idea is that we want people to get to know their areas better and to share stories and memories, as also visions for the future. If there's things that you think, oh gosh, is that really the direction we're going? You know, share those. That's what's interesting. Jane's Walks is based on Jane Jacobs, who is what we call an urban activist, maybe. She was not a city planner like myself. She was actually a journalist by trade. And what she's best known for, I think, is helping communities to speak up for themselves. And in particular in New York City, Greenwich Village specifically, she was instrumental in saving Greenwich Village and Washington Square Park. And I think most people knows where that is. I mean, it's like sort of like Harvard Square of New York, but bigger. There was a highway that was planned to go through there. Robert Moses, if you don't know that name, he was a very instrumental political elected official that wasn't elected, excuse me, public position, public staff that was going to put a lot of highways and make things much better in various cities. Some of the work that he did was wonderful. I just came back from New York City at a planning conference, and they talked about some of the great things he'd done there, reminding us all that there were some things. But some of his ideas were a little inappropriate and basically decimating neighborhoods and people's memories and landscape very significantly. So Jane Jacobs organized her own community to fight it, and it was successful. And it was sort of like David and Goliath. It was a pretty amazing story. So a lot of people have wanted to celebrate her and the work that she's done and inspired for many years. So every year there's a Jane's Walk, and it's done all around the world, literally. She ended up in Canada, and there's one person here that I hope will share a story she just told me in a minute. But she passed away a year ago. It would have been her 100th, no, she passed away a couple years ago. Her 100th anniversary would have been, 100th birthday would have been last year. So this is the 101st. And we are one of many communities that puts on one of these walks each year. Normally it's the first Saturday of May each year. I'm sure you all know that this is not the first, it's the second, and that's because I was in a planning conference last week in New York City, and I decided rather than not do it at all, we just postpone it. And I don't think it matters to many people, and I'm sure Jane couldn't care less. So anyway, that's why it's called the Jane's Wall. But again, that's the reason why it isn't really to listen to me or Ed talk so much, but rather for you to share your thoughts about what you're seeing. Because a lot of you, if you don't live in the immediate area, have been seeing the changes that have been occurring throughout Somerville, and particularly along the railroad tracks, which is why we chose this theme. I don't need to tell everybody that the railroads were once a big force in this city, like many communities. A lot of development occurred around that because of that. And that's the same thing that's happening now, but for very different reasons. And so what we're going to look at today is what some of those changes are all about. We invited people along the way that have businesses and such to be here, but it's a Saturday morning, beautiful day. So needless to say, most of them have declined to be here today. So we're going to rely on some of you to fill in what you know about it. The handouts are actually to remind some of you about what it used to look like before this area. In some cases we have a then and now picture, and so that says something right there, I think. There's also an old map in here which shows you some of the names of the old streets. For example, Perpetuity Way was not called that in the olden days, if you will. And so I encourage you to look through there as well to get a sense of some of those. And we'll pass by things, we'll let you know. At the end of this tour, 9:30 to 11:30, we're going to end up at 11:15 at Aeronaut. Aeronaut refers to a building that has a lot of space in it, wonderful space, including a brewery. Many of you probably have been there. We're not going there for the brewery part so much as to go to the whole building and see how that's been transformed into something pretty amazing space with a lot of different kind of startups there. But one of the founders of Aeronaut Brewery, Ben Holmes, is going to be there, and he knows a lot about the history of the building, is very excited about it, so he's going to share some of his observations about what they did and how that area is changing as well. And then, of course, once you're there, we're hoping that you'll stay, pick up some lunch. We've arranged for a food truck to be there that has a whole variety of really great food. It's a brother and sister, just so you know in advance, and I hear really good things about it. I've never tried this particular one, but they will be offering food for sale. And then I've arranged for there to be special drinks there. But Tower Root Beer is a name that some people know. It's put up by Prospect Hill Beverages, which is a company that first started in Somerville back in 1914. They were very popular. They came up with the Tower Root Beer based on the Prospect Hill Tower. It was a big popular flavor at that time, and they have actually 8 other flavors as well. And they were in business up until the war. And then they went underground, if you will. And the third generation family actually revived the business and started it up again a couple of years ago. So they have these wonderful sodas there. I've arranged for 4 flavors: root beer, ginger beer, cream soda, and raspberry lime Rickies to be there, so you can try it for purchase. It's sort of fun. It's a legitimate business. They actually sell it in various sort of specialty stores as well. And then you can sit down and relax, and Ed Gordon will then do the talking. He has a wonderful PowerPoint presentation that he and Sharon have put together about the economic history of Somerville. So after you've heard a lot about it on the ground, in the trenches type of stories, then you go and hear a little bit more going all the way back to the beginning of Somerville. So that'll start at noontime. From noon to 1 will be the PowerPoint and talk. And then we'll have a chance for questions and answers. I hope you'll stay and ask some pointed questions. We'll all be there. And so that's the schedule, okay? And we can see a little bit of sort of what's been happening here. As you probably well know, Somerville Avenue, I should have mentioned while we were on it, but I'm sure you've all noticed that Somerville Avenue has dramatically changed, and I would say improved over the last 15 years or so. People are now investing in their properties, upgrading in most cases. Lots of new uses. The housing that was in tough shape before in many cases has all been fixed up. Their rents, I'm sure, have gone up. And there's a lot of new stores and such. We resurfaced with the benefit of a state grant Somerville Avenue several years ago, and that really inspired, I think, a lot of people to take Somerville Avenue, take notice of it. And there's all new street furniture on there, and all these kinds of things make a big difference. There's lots of benches. Of course, Conway Park. You probably all know, but maybe not, that was actually the Middlesex Bleachery before, which was one of the oldest industries in the city of Somerville. It was rather well known at the time, was one a major employee as well. So, you want to say anything about Middlesex Bridge?
about the Middlesex Bleachery and Dye Works. That was started in 1821, where Conway Park is today, and that was in business as late as the mid-1930s. And it was one of the first factories in the U.S. to use steam-powered tools. Basically, it was like the finishing of textiles, literally the bleaching, if it was going to be for, bed linens or, dyeing textiles different colors. And so this was right around the time that Lowell got started as a textile city in 1822. So it's early in the textile industry history. And this is happening even before the railroad, which comes in the mid to late 1830s, the Fitchburg Railroad that we're about to cross, now the B&M. So, Middlesex was way ahead of the curve.
And also they were instrumental for the environment. Do you want to say anything about that?
They were the first to start dumping their industrial waste into the Millers River, which we no longer even think about because it's been put underground.
Except those people have basements that are actually on top of it.
Right.
Where is that?
The Millers River paralleled the south side of the railroad tracks here, and it started off of the Charles River, next to where the Warren Bridge is that connects Charlestown to Boston, and it extended into Somerville. It went under what is now Medford Street in the Paul Gore, South Street, Horace Street, Ward Street, that area. And then it took a hard right north towards Somerville Ave, and then a left crossing Prospect, and going through the Everett Street neighborhood, and then going along by the railroad tracks. And so, this was a river that was in many ways a glorified creek. It was, really not anyone's idea of a river, but there were two quite large pond-like features over on either side of Medford Street. And if you come to my talk early this afternoon, you'll find out why the Millers River disappeared.
Fair enough. So the Middlesex Bleachery had a good history until they did some not so good things. And then ultimately the city wanted to take over that land, and because there's no taxes being paid on it, so we took it over and created a wonderful park. Hopefully you've all been in that park. I don't know if you have kids or not, but it's worth going in. We actually celebrate some of the city's history with what some people call the lollipop signs that are there. And so you can learn a lot about some history just by walking around in the park, and you don't have to go down the slide. And this is the impetus for a lot of the development that occurred along this area. As Ed has just said, this was the Fitchburg Railroad that started here, no longer called that. And so Ed, you can come up closer. I do also want to point out, this was one of the first developments down here that really took advantage of the industry, the larger lots that you have with industry. And that's really why you get where you get these large parcels of land. I don't need to tell anybody here, if you live in Somerville, a lot of our lots are quite small. Postage stamp, many have referred to them as. So a development like this would certainly not be feasible unless you had 6 of them or so. But where you had industry, you obviously had large buildings. They were flat and long, often linear buildings, not very tall, but they had a fair amount of square footage. And so this was one of the projects that came before the city's planning board. I used to be the city's planning director. This was one of the many projects we had in this area that came forth. We were under a lot of pressure back in the 1980s, development pressure, from people that wanted to come in and do development in Somerville. Our zoning code had not been updated in over 25 years. It reflected that. There was a hodgepodge of provisions in there that often contradicted each other, and so we needed to redo that. Ward 2, which as I said is this area, is how it's known as, it borders with Cambridge, I'm sure everybody knows. And because of that, people that decided that they've been developing Cambridge for years decided Somerville was the next frontier. So they came here and took advantage of our code. And so we made some changes and updated it. It was passed finally in 1990 under Michael Capuano's administration, although it had been mostly developed during Eugene Bruin's administration. And that helped us control and manage the growth a whole lot better. But this particular project here was a challenging one, in the sense that what they originally came in for the number of units and the appearance of them and such was not what we would say we'd write home about. So there's one person here, I'm hoping, Paula, will speak up, because she was instrumental, again, like a Jane Jacobs, in helping, get the neighborhood to be concerned about the project, to think about what would be a better design or a good design for there, and really, I think it turned out very well. So Paula, do you want to come forth and say?
Yeah, so I live on Ivaloo Street, which is this one going down there, and I was the only owner in residence on the block facing this old warehouse. And one day, an associate of the developer visited our house and said, by right, we're going to grandfather in this huge, big block of a building that's going to follow the line of the old warehouse, which was right on the sidewalk for much of the stretch, and then just a little maybe 5 feet back for this end. And because it was a corner lot, this was going to be the front yard. They could choose, and the whole length of it would be the side yard. So even if they had to change off the grandfather line, it would only have to be 10 feet back from the sidewalk. This mammoth, characterless block of a building. So we started getting upset, and our local alderman, Kevin Tarpley, who was terrific, came to visit and said, you guys have a right to stand up and say what you want, and I will support you. The alderman at large, Denise Provost, who's gone up to higher office, she also further informed us that commercial space was going to be of greater service to the city tax-wise than this huge density that would be allowed. It was a different zone than our just across the street residential. It was also residential, but allowed higher density, and it was just overwhelming to us. So I happen to have two architect friends, retired architect friends, who said, get a hold of the zoning ordinance book, which I grabbed a copy of, my old copy here. And one of them went over it with her very fine little red ink pen and made these beautiful notes and underlined and educated me and said, and a couple of others of us, about what it actually said and what we could fight and what we should bring to public meetings. And so we started leafleting the neighborhood. We met fabulous neighbors. I'd already lived here 25 years and I didn't know these people, but got to know a bunch of terrific people of all kinds of backgrounds, old timers and new students and whatever. So we started having regular meetings, and it was an amazing experience, and I think I misbehaved just a few times, but whatever. After the second design redo, we seemed to start getting a lot of respect for our position. Less density, more consideration for parking issues, more in keeping with the look of the block, more cutbacks so that the sense of the mass of the building was diminished by having little inset areas, pushing the whole thing back closer to the railroad tracks, yes, but back off the street so it didn't sort of loom over the street. Other
landscaping?
Landscaping, issues around the traffic appreciation and the flow. What else? Brandon was there as planning director. She had to be a neutral in a sense because of her position, but she was very supportive and very helpful. And what else to say? It was amazing.
What's the timing? Can you let people know what?
It went on for a long time.
Right.
I think it went on for over a year. I was trying. I don't
and
have.
What was the year? 1990.
The big meeting in front of the zoning board was at the fall of 2000. I think we first got information in 1999. So it went into 2001 for sure.
Right.
So well over a year.
And just so you know, this is a classic example. Look at Jane Jacobs. Your profession is?
I'm a furniture builder.
So she is not a planner. She has nothing to do with this. She learned it all on the job. Obviously, she pulled in some people that had some background as well. So, I mean, it's just a wonderful story. And Paula is one of many, one of my favorite people who I've worked with on these things because she really did save this area. I mean, it was going to be redeveloped. We wanted to have mixed use. This was at the time in the late 1990s where the argument was being made. Certainly I was making it.
And we got mixed use.
Yeah, and we got mixed use. It's mixed use. And the reason for mixed use, and now it's sort of, everyone says, oh yes, of course, we need to do mixed use. But at that time, it wasn't really so popular. The idea is that you get more taxes from commercial assessed properties than you do from residential. Many people argue that residential development doesn't even pay for itself because they demand so many services and such. So, so the one advantage is the tax revenues from it. And the second thing is that you have complementary uses so that when the people are working during the daytime typically, then they leave at the end of the day at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and then the residents come back. So that if you have a lot of cars, that's the way to minimize it. You can share spaces. So that was another, advantage of it as well. And then, of course, you have the mixed uses that add some diversity and interest to an area. I mean, that's what cities are all about, is you often don't have the segregated uses in the same way that you do in the suburbs, where I know a lot of people flee to because they like that, but then there are those of us that prefer not to have that. So anyway, mixed use is now kind of the byword in planning, and certainly in Somerville, but this was one of the first projects. And Paula and her neighbors were instrumental in making that clear. The developer didn't really want to do that. Again, developers prefer to do residential. That's often called the high-end use and such, and higher and best use, so they get the most money back. But so what? That's not what we're involved in doing here, making their money for them. So we might just look around when we go here. I think the project turned out very nicely. In the sense it's a lot of units, but I don't know, Paula, do you know any of the people in there?
This is kind of the more overwhelming end, but down the street there is the effect of a gable, a pattern of gable that roofed fronts that match the further street on Harrison that is all gable with spaces in between. And so that front end gable gives an attractive flow. And the idea was that on Park Street it was more appropriate. They could build up because we look around and, well, see a little bit more of it and it'd be more appropriate.
Yeah, so when we go by, do look down because a lot of time was spent, and Paula was really instrumental in this. She has a design background, obviously. She's a wonderful craftsman, by the way, if you ever want to buy furniture and you can afford her.
Expensive.
It's very expensive. But she actually was part of SOS last year, and it's the kind of stuff you go to a museum to see the pieces that she does, and she's in museums. She's at the Smithsonian. So anyway, her architecture, her design background was very instrumental in helping this project turn out as well as it did. And she's absolutely right. If you go down the street there, Ivola Street, which was a sleepy little street before this, the streetscape is not dramatically ruined by this development, which it really was going to be otherwise. So again, thank you, Paula.
And lovely people moved in.
Exactly, and so you've gotten to know some of the people in there. And what also it does is when you get involved in your neighborhood, you get to know a lot of people that you don't know, and you find out there's some really interesting people living right in the midst of you. So it's actually, I don't want to tell you to go out and organize, but that is the upside of when you get involved in your area for some particular reason. So here behind us is another former industrial use. Where's Lubov? Lubov, are you someplace? You talk about the Esh, what it was before?
I don't happen to know what it was before.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've been told that it was a highly polluted site.
Okay, okay. I wouldn't be surprised. And actually, there was a woman here that was on Morgan Street. Where's my Morgan Street friend? She was talking about. Oh, there you are. So, what were you going to share? What you heard?
No, I had heard from a green yellow cab driver that he had grown up in the neighborhood. We're on Morgan Street, one over there, in the late 40s, early 50s, and there was a smelter, an iron smelter in the area.
Conway Park.
It was, yeah. But
Well, the Conway Park was Bay State Smelting. After it was the Middlesex Bleacher, it was Bay State Smelting, and they're the ones that really polluted even further and didn't pay their taxes. So.
And the fumes came over into this area, and he said that they discovered in the school system that the kids from that area had problems.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, and as I was saying, lead is a problem throughout cities all across the country, obviously. Lead paint is particularly, but in near industry is even more concentrated for obvious reasons. So that's another reason why cleaning up these sites and replacing them with something else is not such a bad idea, as long as we can have it blend in with the rest of the neighborhood and do the kinds of things we just talked about here. All along here was industry because of the railroad tracks as well. So we're going to walk down here further and go down.
Brandon?
Yeah.
Just before we move on,
Yeah.
I wanted to mention a quick thing. So it seems kind of impossible now given the progress on the Green Line extension, but one thing to know about this area is that there are proposals to actually continue the spur from Union Square all the way out to Porter Square along this railroad corridor. And so this intersection is actually one of the proposed sites of a Green Line T-stop. Again, it's very highly theoretical. It's kind of seems impossible these days, but the T has, at least at some public meetings, committed to ensuring the design of the Union Square T-stop does not preclude future expansions down to Porter Square. And so all along Somerville Ave on this rail corridor, there will be multiple stops that have been planned out and proposed.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Good point. And that is one of the things that, the rails have turned out to be very helpful for other reasons as well. The Rails to Trails program, I'm sure you've heard about. It's in cities all across the country where they've been declared surplus. They're no longer using it, and they turn it into like our community path that we have outside Davis Square that goes all the way out to Bedford. So there's lots of different advantages that we have living near the railways. It used to be that, in the recent past, that nobody wanted to live along the railways because they were noisy and dirty and all those things. And that's very much changing. If the one along, the community path, that was the same thing. People said, oh, we don't want to be backed up to this former rail yard when we wanted to turn to the community path. For a long time, you might not know this, but that was very controversial. In the 1980s, when the city's planning office, of which I was working with, we wanted to convert that to what has become a basic community path. The neighbors along there were saying, no way, that's just going to become an escape route from people coming on the Red Line and going back to Dorchester and, the riffraff there in order to, rob people's houses and such. And so they wanted no part of it whatsoever. So we didn't give up and then came back again in the 1990s and actually were able to take over that property and work with the T in order to turn to the community path. And now it's actually more coveted real estate because you are on the community path. So it's just funny how over time people's impressions and opinions about things really change and how these changing land uses are going. I call it Innovation Row, which I dubbed it with the CEO of Greentown Labs a couple of years ago when we did this exhibit, because there's a whole lot of innovative new businesses coming in here. Some of them are small, some of them are larger, as we'll see later. And this is an example of a small one, which I just think is just a wonderful kind of, hideaway. Who would have even known it was here except for those wonderful children on the side of the building and, coming back here.
You have to be really hardy to find us. Only the hardiest can come to Bigelow. That's
And just what's the age of the kids that come here?
We enroll in September. We keep the children together for a full year. Our whole program is built around community. Our whole building is designed around community. So we enroll once a year, and the children are 3 months when they come in to 5 years. So we have infants through pre-K. I believe we're the only full-time care cooperative in the area, and it is a true cooperative. It's parents need to be on a committee, or they need to come to 2 outdoor work days each year. They need to participate in the classroom, and once every month there are classroom and community meetings. So we give them the time, the tool, and the space to become part of a community. So.
Yeah.
2012. Yeah.
Yeah, they've done an amazing job. We're not going to go in today, but I'm sure that Melinda would love for you to come back and look at inside. I've been inside, and it's great space. They really did a wonderful job. You can see all the glass that they put in here. It doesn't look at all it was, gritty kind of neighborhood. It definitely was that before, which is why the uses like this are so exciting and interesting to see popping up. And it takes people like Melinda and all of the families here to make this happen. And again, that's all we keep hearing over and over again. So Paula, please.
Are you protected to stay here? Do you have a long rent? Do you own it?
That is such a good question. We hope not. There are neighbors that care very deeply about what happens here. We have a 10-year lease with a 5-year extension. We don't own, we rent. We did pay about $1 million to renovate the building. It is a triple net lease, so we pay like we own, but we don't own. We are doing some long-range planning. We're hoping that we can stay. And yeah, it's tricky to find a space. We had only a short window. We had about a year before we needed to move, and we found this, and they were kind enough to let us renovate rent-free for a year, because it's a big deal trying to move a
You certainly
school.
improved the property. Who actually owns the property?
They're called Bellum LLC, and they have a lot of real estate development. They're into a whole lot of different things, but they have a lot of property in Somerville, and yeah.
And you have a lot of families that are from Somerville, Cambridge, and throughout the area, or?
We do. We started with mostly Cambridge families who followed us here, and as more young families are moving to Somerville, we have, it's not yet 50-50, but then our demographics are such that people start to move to the suburbs. So we have Arlington and we have Lexington, and yeah, that's about as far
And
as
Sharon
we
lives in
extend.
Somerville, so she was a Somerville person.
Yeah.
And I would just add that I can't emphasize enough how entrepreneurial it was of Melinda and other people on the board to move into the area. And one thing especially is that there was a parent who was an architect and just put in, hundreds and hundreds of hours, of volunteer hours to design the space. If you go in, it's beautiful, like she said, and this is a nonprofit, so it is innovation, like it's social entrepreneurship, that brought this service into the area, and it was a really great thing to watch.
This whole brick area used to be a ice skating rink. You know that?
Yeah, well, please, share that.
Oh yeah. So Jim Bennett built it for his son to play and practice hockey, and so this area that's now several $1 million loft home, but was an ice skating rink. He's got great pictures.
Oh, interesting. And he lives right down there on that
Nevada Street. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, this whole area was totally different than there was actually Firefly Press. You'll see there's a picture in there as well. And that home, that wonderful home you're talking about, is actually, I invited her to be part of this, but she was not able to come, is actually the head of the MIT architecture department, Dean, and totally renovated the place, did a fabulous job. One other year when we did a walking tour, she actually shared some information with us, but as you can imagine, her schedule was crazy, so I don't think she's going to be there today. I might be pleasantly surprised, and so we'll see. So again, let's keep moving, but again, I'm glad you're able to see this great little niche. Okay, we're going to go back out onto a park. This is a neighbor that I invited to come, but they're leaving, so they're not able to be here. But I just want to introduce you. We've done a lot of work down here. This is Elliott Street. We just came down. I didn't even know the name of the street and before I did this tour.
Yeah.
This is Property Way, and this is actually was not always called Property Way. It was called.
It was Vine Street,
Exactly.
but it's a continuation of Property on the other side.
Exactly, and you can't get through there.
Yeah.
But you lived here since 2004, you were saying?
2004, yes.
Yeah, and she was very much involved when, just so you know, the building down there, the reason why we came down here, we're stopping here, that brick building there is owned by Moshe Sadfi, which is a very significant, globally known architectural firm. Actually, not the brick one.
It's brick beyond, and the cottage just there that you can see
that
at
was
the
the
end.
next thing I was going to say, is that
Yes.
that house there actually is where Moshe Sadfi, the principal, who literally travels all around the world, has done some fabulous projects all over the world, actually lives when he comes into town. He actually lives elsewhere in a historic house, and where they want to do some work, some renovation work, which we weren't very fond of what they wanted to do, to make a long saga short. So the neighbors weren't either. So I've worked with the neighbors over a period of time in the early 2000s about this. Moshe Sadfi has actually expanded their building quite a lot over time. Including in the back side of there, you can see there's a parking lot. We're not going to go back there and such. And they had to get a lot of waivers from the zoning ordinance in which to do that. So we work closely with them.
Yes, it's actually a nice addition, but it's a little too big. But the first edition they did, which is the glass edition, is really quite stunning. I don't know if you can see it from the street, but it really is quite beautiful. But it's maybe the wrong context for such a building.
Yeah, this
That's
is very much
say.
a residential street, low scale, and the people that bought houses here and lived here and very fond of it wanted to stay that way. And what you can't see from here, but if you were to go into the backyards of these houses, there's this huge open green space with gardening and flowers, and they've just done a wonderful job taking that over, caring for it and such.
As you walk down that way, you can look into our backyard.
Okay,
and
can we do that?
Ours is ours is a worker's cottage that was, I think the first part was probably here in the 1860s or so. I can't find exact records, and so were most of these other houses. I think this was probably rebuilt, but these are obviously workers' cottages as well. Those just got rebuilt, unfortunately. But our house is really quite small.
As all the houses on the street are. I mean, they're small working cottages, as she said.
Small working cottages.
But you know, they're special to the people that own them and live in them, and you very much find that this is a very tight neighborhood. They again all got together and organized and were successful in helping that building become a lot nicer than it was going to be, not as big.
And other buildings at the end and things like that.
Exactly.
So, but have a great walk.
Thank you so much. Great. So we're just going to walk down really quickly there just to show you, because I think it's worth seeing a part of Somerville that otherwise you might not. Be careful walking across the street, obviously. But we'll go down. Moshe Sadfi is, again, an internationally known firm, and they do great work all around the world. They get all kinds of awards and such. But when they came to Somerville to do some work here, it was interesting to see how a lot of those same concepts seem to disappear. Did you are the ones that did the windmill, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So can you talk about that? Yeah, exactly. It used to be in the front.
Yeah, we used to have an automobile dealership over there, and it was there. It was on top of the...
This is the Regazio Dodecan?
no, not Dodecan.
Oh, not the
Regazio. Yeah, Dodecan's over there.
Okay.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore.
They're kicking us all out. They didn't want business in the city. And times are changing.
Yeah, well, we were just talking about that, how in fact the city is trying to do more mixed use and actually having...
Yeah, they're going back to it a little bit, but not heavy stuff.
Well, no, not the heavy industry. And in fact, we just came from Conway Park and just talking about what used to be there in the Middlesex Bleachery and the other industrial uses that were kind of polluting and such, but how it's changing over and about the building right where Gray Sales was that Paula was talking about.
Yeah, that was the Gray Sales. Yeah, that's right.
And then Peter Fork and such. Peter Fork is still there.
Yeah, Peter Fork's still there.
And you've lived here for how many years?
62.
Yeah, exactly. He and I worked together when, again, a lot of this development was happening down here that the neighbors weren't necessarily in favor of. They wanted to keep the area, very much like it had been and has always been and such. And so their property, the windmill, can you talk a little bit about that, what that was all about?
I don't know. We put that up, I don't know, as a kid, 63, 64 in that area. We put it up. It used to be on top of the building. Over where that building is. It was, when we had our shop there. It used to be on the roof of that building. And then, we got out in 1986. And that went in, and we're still here.
Yeah, these the buildings over, the brick buildings that actually face onto Beacon Street was the whole basis in which we were actually able to do the rezoning in Ward 2. That was where I mentioned before there was a lot of development pressures because it's on the border with Cambridge. People were coming in with buildings that were just outlandishly large. I mean, they were just dwarfing the whole area. It was supposed to be 10-story buildings. The only positive thing I can say about that is it was helpful in helping me get the zoning ordinance passed for Ward 2. And then we went on to do the whole city as as well.
So we actually helped you.
Yes, you were very helpful.
Back then, we ruined the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we were told.
Well, you certainly didn't hear that from.
The neighbors didn't want to talk.
Yeah, certainly. I didn't hear that.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, didn't hear that from me.
I'm still here.
No, you are still here, and I'm delighted to see that. And
You know,
so,
my family's here. My grandson and my daughter live in the old house I grew up in.
hi, what's your name?
Dominic.
Dominic. Nice to meet you, Dominic. And you look like you're a hard worker too.
Yeah, I like it. It's a nice neighborhood. It's quiet.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, this is what's really special about Somerville. I mean, people have literally been here for generations, one family to the next. Oftentimes they're living in 2- and 3-family houses, in which case, you know, sometimes they start off with on the first floor because it's smaller, then they move upstairs when they have their family, and then they move back downstairs when the kids have all left home and they can stay there. So, I mean, this is what makes the city wonderful, and it's the roots that people put into this community that I think makes it special and why people want to stay here. And again, you know, sometimes the city has some great ideas, and sometimes developers come in with some great new projects. Sometimes not, and that's when you need to speak up and, you know, join together and actually, you know, make sure that you get a development that blends in and fits in with your neighborhood. And you were very instrumental in doing that, and I hope you don't feel the city was working against you.
No. They didn't. I mean, actually, they wanted to put a 10 or 11-story building
Yeah, exactly.
there, so that worked out.
Yeah, exactly. No,
It doesn't bother me, to be honest with you.
Good. No, the building that came down, I mean, they went through more than one architect on this building. There's a long saga that went along with, which I was very much involved with. Along with the alderman at the time was Callahan, I think, was the first one.
Yeah,
and then Paula mentioned Alderman Tarpley was there. The ward aldermen for Ward 2 are the hardest working aldermen in the city, I have to tell you, and I've worked with all of them. Right now, Mary Jo Rossetti, Mary Ann Houston is the ward alderman, and she is also very constituent oriented. She's very much listens to people. She's very concerned. She was on the Board of Appeals for years, knows what happens when a developer comes in and really tries to do something that's inappropriate. So she's up for re-election, so I think it's important that people, you know the kind of work that these aldermen do on your behalf, and there's some that work harder than others. And Ward 2, as I said, has had so much threatened because of the Cambridge border as well. So, but it's great to see you here today working on the house, and it looks great.
We're trying to make it look better.
Yeah, it always looks good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. This actually extends back quite a ways. This is the house I mentioned that the principal actually was residing in at one point, and now I think they use as conference space when dignitaries from around the world come, or clients, and their architects. And this is an addition they did just a couple of years ago in here, which is all connected through tunnels and such. It's a very interesting space, and I'm sorry they're not on here today. One of the principals of the firm, Paul, and I have worked together on a lot of things. They've wanted to do some demolition down here, including of this house here, which is when we ran into differences. So anyway, let's go back down the street because I want to make sure we kind of get to.
Just want to add something
please,
about Softy.
Yeah.
Probably his best known project, and it was like a very early one, was Habitat in Montreal, the very distinctive housing that's right on the St. Lawrence River, and it's got this very interesting kind of stepped back, it looks like it has lots of moving parts and projections, and sort of an echo of that, a more recent echo, is in Cambridge on the Charles River. It's the building that's part brick and I think part concrete on the upper stories that's got these kind of a terraced effect. That's in front of, I think it's called the Athenaeum building, that has the statue of Athena on top of it. It's right in front of that building, kind of across from MGH. But anyway, I believe he has an office in Tel Aviv and a couple of other places, and he teaches at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And he's, way up there in the world of architecture.
And also to their credit, when I was doing the rezoning of this area, they actually testified at the hearing about these buildings and why this wasn't particularly good design that was being presented, and helped us make it much better. So they've been good neighbors in the end, where we work together on a lot of things. So thank you, Ed. That's great. just so you know, the city of Somerville is actually trying to make this into a local historic district. Some of the people in this area want to preserve and protect it, and one way to do that is by having it become a local historic district, which can be a collection of properties that if you do any alterations to the exterior, you're subject to review by the Historic Preservation Commission, to which I am staff. And it doesn't mean that you can't make alterations or changes. It just means you have to go through a review process, hopefully let your neighbors know what you're doing, and do it sensitive to the original architecture. So we haven't actually done that. It's on our long list of areas in which to do, but the neighbors were very instrumental in having this area surveyed, and that's why Ed did a lot of surveying down here at one point of these houses, which are not particularly grandiose. I mean, they are literally workers' cottages. They're quite small inside, but they're very serviceable, and people love them. This was a foundry before. This is what has been converted to very lovely high-end residential. I mentioned the MIT dean that lives here, and she's done a fabulous job. One year when we came down here, she actually talked to about it, but as I said, I don't think her schedule is going to allow for it this time. This behind you is this new housing that's been put in there. It's nice, but many people will argue that it's out of scale with the neighborhood. I think you just saw the kinds of houses that were down lower, that they're basically small houses and such. This isn't very much in contrast to that. So there was a lot of opposition, I guess you can say, to that. But, this is the types of developments that people often want to come in and put in now because they think they can. And so the neighborhood, that's why they want to do this local historic preservation district, in order to prevent that from happening potentially, or at least to have more of a say in the kind of design that happens. Somebody made the comment that the brick buildings that I just pointed out there on Beacon Street are hideous buildings and they don't like them at all. All I can say to you is it's a whole lot better than what was going in there before. And it actually, it's bigger than a lot of the rest of the area, but I think it was more sensitive to the kinds of materials that are being used and the design and framing and such. This
What was here before the development happened?
Smaller houses.
So they joined multiple plots together?
No, it's a. Oh, is that? Okay, that's helpful, yeah. Right, I'm sorry that David Guss, who used to be on our Historic Preservation Commission, who is actually a professor who's retiring this year from Tufts of anthropology and such, it lives on the street. He was actually very helpful in alerting, huh? Yes, he lives right next to this house, and so if this is not a neighborhood that sat back and just said, oh, okay, roll over us sort of thing. And he and his wife were very much involved with this LHD that I mentioned and such. He's unfortunately not here today because he's a trustee at the Somerville Museum, and they happen to have a meeting the same day once a month. So he apologized. He could take up the whole hour telling you about this area, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to do that, nor do we have time. But these buildings here, this is exactly, kind of what happens. If you have small lots and you develop to the actual max, you get a much larger building than that was here before. I do want to turn over the page. They have some old pictures that Lubov has found of this area on Village Street. You can see sort of what the original house would have looked at. This is actually at the end of the corner, Dane and Village Street, the one on the top versus the one on the bottom. People have different ideas about how to improve a property. And then on this Village Street, you'll see on the third page, there's 46 Village Street, and again, how the property, that one particular property has changed over time as well, and with the garage, which has been removed. A lot of what people end up doing, if you're wondering how they get the extra land, is they take down the accessory structure that's here, the garage and such, which gives them some extra space to build on, and that might have been the case here.
I have to apologize to this man over here. You were correct that those two buildings are not the same. You probably knew that you were right. But anyway, so one on the corner used to be a grocery store, and it kind of just gives you a sense of, like the low-scale workers' housing, residential neighborhood, the fact that they just had their own little corner grocery store. They actually had two. They all worked probably around these factories and these industries. And then you kind of look at the older photos from probably the early 2000s. the area was pretty run down, as tends to happen with deindustrialization and all the post-war stuff that happened. But now, you know, we have things like these new housing developments and all the businesses that are coming in. So it's kind of a new golden age for this area. So you can just keep those photos in mind as we're going to walk down. Yeah.
Ruth, do you want to say something about B. Allen? Because I think you probably know a little bit about that because you were here.
Yeah, I just remember it being this great place. B. Allen was this wonderful public artist, really. I think she moved to California now, but I think her last thing she did was...
I think New Mexico. Or
Oh, okay. Down at the Osco in Davis Square, that mural on the wall. But anyway, I know the open air circus, which Pat Jalen and others started way back then, used to have a lot of things here. And I just think a lot of public things would be held there. I think B made it very available. It was just this huge rambly place inside. So yeah, it was cool, very cool.
That's a good memories. And yes, absolutely. B. Allen, for those of you who don't know, is a very significant, at least certainly in this area's artist, public artist. She did a lot of murals, including the one right in Union Square that is still there to this day, which is on the side of the brick building that takes place of the American Revolution and George Washington. So I'm sure you've all seen that as well. Unfortunately, she did move. She retired and then moved, I think, to New Mexico. And we were all very sad, had a big ceremony for her as well. This was probably about 10 years ago now. But this was originally her building, and she, as she said, Ruth said, actually let it be available to lots of different community groups and uses and such, and it was a real community space. Needless to say, this area is pretty congested and tightly settled, as they want to say. But a lot of people know each other here. They've been here for generations, and it's a real neighborhood. And again, this is the kind of thing that often gets taken over by other people not appreciating, you know, what it represents. And so we're obviously trying to prevent that from happening and keep it preserved. So, Ed, do you want to add anything here now?
We are in what is called Duck Village, which is bounded by Dane, Washington, Beacon, and Park. And the Duck Village name goes back to the 1920s and early 30s, and it is linked with prohibition in this country. In 1920, there was an amendment to the Constitution that banned alcohol consumption in this country. And what that didn't affect was to activate a lot of folks who were dedicated to the idea that they wanted to keep on drinking. And, you know, so Duck Village became a place where there were a lot of bootleggers and, you know, bathtub gin being made. And it was called Duck Village, not because there were a lot of waterfowl over here, but because this was a place that you could duck into if the police were on your case, that you could, you know, enter this tangle of streets and, you know, go in the back way of one of these houses and you wouldn't be caught. So, so Prohibition was repealed in 1932. And let me just put in a plug for the Gibson House Museum in the Back Bay. During the first week of December, we have what is called Repeal Day. This is in an 1859 row house on Beacon Street, and we celebrate the end of Prohibition because the last Gibson who lived there made bathtub gin up in the third floor bathroom. So he didn't have to do that anymore. But this was a very dangerous practice because people could go blind or even die if there was a bad batch of homemade gin. So please keep in mind an opportunity to drink craft martinis in a museum setting, okay? All right, first week in December.
So as you go down the street, again, keep your eyes peeled, as I always ask you to do. You'll see some fun takeoffs on Duck Village here. In spite of what Ed just said, they feel otherwise. And also, as you get to the end, you'll see that there is the development that's actually in here, that you can see the 23 Village Street, and then down the street, how they have designed a new building, sort of a takeoff on some of the industry that was here. You can have your opinions about whether you think they did a good job there and fitting into the neighborhood. And that's at the end of the block. And also, I didn't mention this before, but hopefully if you looked at the beginning photographs here, you can see on Park Street all of the wonderful pictures of the old railroads when they were here, very much a part of the community life. So let's walk down here. But this is, as you just want to cross the bridge there, obviously you can see the railroad tracks going through there. It's very much an active railroad line. But if you look carefully, you'll see most of those buildings had actually changed over time, except for the back side of this building with all the graffiti on it. This is a newer building. This is not a historic one by any stretch. This was actually built by Ames Safety Envelope, the company I mentioned before, and it's going to tell you a little bit about them in a second. But these are buildings. This street I don't think even existed. This is called Tyler Street now, and it was created for Ames Safety Envelope because they took over so many of the buildings in this area or built new ones in order to expand their family business. And they were, as I said, a major employee in the city for many, many years, a very enlightened company. Just an example of that is they actually had daycare on site for their workers. They had English as a second language being taught here because so many of their workers were actually immigrants. And they were very much treated their employees almost like a cooperative. And so we did everything we could to help the company. They did a lot of innovative type of things. I mentioned to you that there is a whole exhibit at Greentown Labs in the lobby. If you just go around the corner of this 24 Dane Street building, Greentown Labs, I think many of you might have already heard of before. It is one of our coups, actually, in attracting them from Boston to come here to Somerville. A couple of years ago, they've grown immensely. They're an incubator space for energy development companies, essentially. There's such a long waiting list to get into there. It's a startup business where you can share the resources that are available in a larger building. That they are creating another building, an annex, if you will, and you've probably noticed and been inconvenienced on the sidewalk. You can't go by it right now. The brick building on Somerville Avenue, which used to be the Mako building. They have taken over and are renovating it and creating a much nicer use. And without the fumes and all the the pollution that came out of Mako for many years, including to the cemetery area there. So we're very excited about that building coming. But again, I do encourage you, if you want to learn more about this area and its industrial, innovative past, the exhibit in the Greentown lobby, which I worked on with Ed Gordon and a team of people to create, I think is pretty interesting. There's lots of different information there about how this area changed, lots of good pictures, and it's a family business. These buildings all along here are part of the American Tube Work buildings. Ed's going to share a little bit about that in a second if I'll let him. And then the buildings over here, they had built Ames Safety Envelope, and they have since converted them all to new uses because the business, the company went out of business. They got bought out. They moved to the Midwest. But rather than just sort of throwing in the towel and selling all their buildings to developers who could have done some of we just saw, they decided to keep the space, and they've been renting it out in many cases in the beginning to smaller startup businesses. And this is the block that, as I mentioned before, I and the Greentown Labs CEO have dubbed Innovation Row, and that's because there are a lot of new innovative type of businesses that have started up there, which includes Brooklyn Boulders, rock climbing gym, that also, as I was saying before, offers parkour, which is a new and innovative kind of movement, fitness movement as well. And also the Artisans Asylum, which is shared space for people that want to work on kind of art projects but of larger scale and such, and Aeronaut Brewery and all the space that they have there as well. So Ed, do you want to share about the history part?
Well, yes. Across the street, that was the location of American Tube Works, which got started in 1851. And that company very successfully made seamless brass and copper tubes and piping that was used by railroads and steamships. And it was in business until the mid-1930s. And they went through two generations of buildings. The 1850s and 60s buildings were taken down in the 1890s to 1920s period, and the oldest extant building in the complex over across the street is an 1890s blacksmith shop, which is the building right next to the Family Market parking lot. If you walk by there, you'll often hear bands rehearsing. What did I call it?
Market basket.
What did I say?
Family bar.
I meant yes.
It is run by a family.
And I've shopped in there many times and enjoy the very good prices.
The family
but
is well known now for reasons
yes.
that I think you probably all know.
Right. So then, Ames safety envelope gets started in the late the company dates to 1919, and not to get too far into the story, but it was literally a cottage industry in the beginning, whereby the McLaughlin family, who started Ames, were literally reinventing envelopes to make them more secure. And one of the McLaughlins worked for the post office and kept seeing these envelopes that would fall apart and valuable contents would spill out. And so he had this brilliant idea that he could build a better envelope, which he and his family members did. And so by the late 1930s, they're in a position to move over here off of Somerville Avenue and to start the company and expand it. And they are primarily stationary, but they get into color-coded files for hospitals and other institutions. And they're in business until the early 2000s, and it's really the digital age that makes their files less up to date. So then they had the brilliant idea of leasing their buildings to these companies that add so much to Somerville's culture and economy, frankly. So, okay, so I think I've said my piece. I've earned my keep a little bit here.
Yeah, the sense of vitality in this area as well has been greatly enhanced by some of these businesses. In addition, they also have Harvard and MIT as some of their owners and such. The rents have gone up since they first started. It was when they first did this, they didn't know if they were going to find tenants and such, and so that's how these businesses were able to be here. We're very much hoping over time to try and preserve and protect these smaller businesses and the space for them, because this is how startups get going. And Somerville is known for having a lot of innovative, popular businesses start here and then get bigger and go elsewhere. You know, Elephant Walk was in a restaurant here, Steve's Ice Cream, Bertucci's, all started here in Somerville. So we'd like to have them stay. So we're gradually trying to make it so that they can both start up here as well as expand here. This is always the goal. It's hard to do with rising real estate values. I don't need to tell anybody here that lives in Somerville how much they've gone up. So it's a challenge, but that's what the new zoning is trying to do. We have what's called a fabrication or a maker. This is not one of the quieter areas. So that's what we're working on right now. The building over here, which was actually the powerhouse, the boiler house, was one of the beginning of my relationship with Ames Safety Envelope. They wanted to take this building down, to demolish it, to do some of their expansion. Needless to say, they lost. They did a renovation job here. They did a great job. We've worked with them on this parking lot and such, this garage space over there. I've worked with them over decades doing a lot of different things. And as I said, this is a new street that was put in. They bought these buildings here, and they've become a very good neighbor to the city and very much involved in the economic sense of the city as well as the social. So we're just going to head down the end of the block. Again, the other innovative uses are here. This is a new development that happened here. Unfortunately, I think the developer has left. But anyway, the developer was on the tour earlier today. And we're going to head right into Aeronaut. And yes, please.
The city is working on designating this area as a historic district, right? As an industrial. And can you speak to any progress or?
He's in the know about a lot of things. Well, yes. As I was saying before, in Proberzi Way, the city has a desire to actually try and preserve and protect, and a local historic district is one way to do that. The American Tube Work buildings have all been surveyed. They are eligible for the National Register, which we would like to pursue. We did these surveys quite some time ago, back in 1990 and such, industrial commercial survey. We're since doing it also for a local historic district. They're not always the most popular with the owners of the buildings, because it does to to their mind, restrict their ability to do whatever they please with the buildings. So the long and short of it is a goal to do that. It's not happening right away. We're working on the Union Square redevelopment and getting that plan all fixed, and the zoning now is before the Board of Aldermen. And then in addition, we want to have an LHD, as it's called, Local Historic District, for the whole good many parts of Union Square to try and preserve and protect those neighbors, those particular streets and neighbors and such. That's coming thereafter. We're not quite there yet, but yes. But again, we do work with the property owners. If they're adamantly opposed and garner a lot of support, then it's very hard to go forward, because the Board of Aldermen does not like to designate people's properties historic without the owner's support. Occasionally they do it. The Somerville Theater is an example of that. When they wanted to make major alterations to that back in the 1990s, Friends of the Somerville Theater formed and fought that, and obviously we were successful. So it doesn't say that it can't be done, but that's what we're trying to do, is to work with the owners themselves. So thank you. Any other questions or memories before we move on? I'd love to hear from any of you if you've lived in this area and noticed, or if you like the changes, or what you're thinking about it after. Good to see you.
The Religious Society got started in 1915 in a storefront on Somerville Avenue, and by 1925 or 6, the church was completed, and then Father Nazareno Properzi was the priest there until the early 1960s, so from 1915 to about 1962. And needless to say, he had an enormous positive impact on the community. And prior to 1915, some of Somerville's Italians were walking all the way to the North End to go to church, or walking into Cambridge and Charlestown. So this was much needed for the Italian community.
As Paula mentioned before, there were a lot of Italian immigrants that lived in this area, Irish as well, but very much an immigrant area, which is what AIM Safety Envelope drew from as well. People worked, and there was workers' housing, like we just saw on the streets before. And so, okay, so we're going to go in. Ben is the person who's going to talk to us a little bit about the aeronaut space as well. I want Ben, who's one of, as I said, the co-founders of this space here, who's been instrumental in making this all happen, this wonderful space. He's not shy, but and he also knows a lot about history and can tell you about his end of it. Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Aeronaut. Welcome to this historic block. I believe Brandon's taken you guys all through sort of the beautiful territory, which I don't think this is. Oh, I see. Okay, cool. Well, I believe Brandon's taken a lot of you guys through. Was it the Duck Village walk
yes,
you did?
Well, that was part of it. Yes, right.
Wonderful.
We didn't get to see all the ducks, but we did talk about them.
So Brandon took you guys around through the Duck Village neighborhood, and now into this. Some people call it Innovation Row. We call this space the Duck Village stage, where we sort of invest in the careers of aspiring young artists. And to just as an aside, before I get into the history of this block, I'll mention that today is Porch Fest, which is Somerville's national holiday. It's the only one, as far as I'm concerned. And if anyone happens to continue their walk into the city over the course of the day, they're going to see more than 100 bands supported by the efforts of the city's Somerville Arts Council that are playing out for people. And I think it's one of the things that we are rightly, as a city, proud of, known for. And I know we will continue to be known for it. And we also have one of the most active cities, one of the most active arts councils in the entire region, which makes this kind of thing possible. So we have a historic commission which is unmatched, and we have an arts council which is likewise absolutely incredible. And I want to thank every single person here. I know many of you guys don't just go on these walks, but also contribute and volunteer. And I'm so proud to be part of Somerville, and I'm so proud to see what goes on here. And I don't know of any other city where these things are possible.
Well, and that's a good segue through his own introduction here that I would say is that Aeronaut has created very special space here, as he will tell you about. It's very innovative. Again, these are smaller businesses that are actually located back there. They're getting their start here. Who knows? They might be over when you go to Paris next time. Just like Taza Chocolate, I now see all over the world. It's just amazing. That's a chocolate factory that started here in Somerville, is still here. And the same thing with the businesses. And this is incubator space for these kinds of businesses, and people like Ben and his other partners are instrumental. So let's hear a little bit from you directly.
Oh, what fun. Cool. So may I just tell these guys about the history of this block? Is that appropriate for this talk?
Absolutely.
And if you guys have heard too much of it already, I know that Brandon and I can both be loquacious, so let us know and we'll hurry it up. And I'm going to run off to Porch Fest pretty soon. So anyhow, right now we're standing in the last functioning site of the Ames Envelope Company. Does anyone, some folks, can I get a show of hands? Who's from Somerville? All right. So if anyone was here in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, for a period of time, the second largest employer in the city was known as Ames Envelope. That was started by JWF, John Fitzgerald, back more than 5 decades ago.
Yes.
And JWF, the name Ames Envelope was actually chosen to, I guess Ed will tell you some of these stories, but basically,
he hasn't told this one yet.
these fellas were, J.W. Fitzgerald was sort of an immigrant of an immigrant background, and built this company which would become the nation's largest maker of basically the safety envelopes which were used for secure document storage in hospitals all around the country. And basically, if you got an X-ray in Texas, at some point in the 90s, there was a good chance of it that was being made here in Somerville. The only larger employer was, of course, the city, which has probably been the largest employer in the city for a long time. Maybe accepting partners, I don't know. More people?
Well, maybe partners now. Once they're fully staffed up, maybe. I don't know.
And so on this site, J.W. Fitzgerald founded Ames Envelope Company for the sole reason, from a naming standpoint, that he thought that the Ames would fly a little bit higher than the Fitzgerald name.
Irish need not apply was very much in force at that time. And the second reason was, do you remember?
Jeez. Well, for the Ames name?
Yep.
I don't know.
It's the beginning of the alphabet.
Cool.
So when you're looking things up, would you?
And
that would maybe apply so much anymore because of telephone book, but now you know.
And in the turn of the century, the envelope company found a lot of competition from digital stuff, and actually, the visionary CEO named Bill Shea began a period of transition of the envelope company into what would become a print and marketing company, like actually a couple of other really cool local companies did. And he actually was sort of in the process of successfully transitioning it into a digital future when some things came up sort of within the company ownership, and some of those plans turned into part of the company moving to is it Iowa, the Midwest,
Yes.
And then part of it eventually closing down as a functioning site. So where we stand right now. I like to think that in 2009, 2010 was the loading bay where the very last safety envelopes were stacked high and prepared for shipment around the country. So as 300,000 square feet, 10 football fields worth of industrial envelope company gradually sunsetted, this was the final site amongst all these brick buildings and all that. You can see back there some of the history of this building involves that building actually being lower in the past, the floors being filled in to increase the available space for shipping bays and envelope companies, and then gradually as the business receded into this pocket, this becoming just a loading bay where the last product was shipped out of the city of Somerville. And then enter 2013, and another set of young people that were aspirational got the idea that they would start a business with a name in the first letter of the alphabet. And
Is that the reason?
well, that's the only reason.
Okay, good. History continues.
So Aeronaut was created. It was one of the last buildings tenanted in what has become the Ames Innovation District, where the sort of these wonderful landowners have elected to partner with young startups that would develop these repurposed industrial spaces in a slew of different ways. So now we stand in a brewery that was one of the final tenants. Aeronaut is a brewery here, a community space all across this side, and then a food manufacturing incubator and our own little life sciences lab called Aeronaut Labs, where we build new recipes, test new yeast, create new flavors, right here in these two spaces, 14 Tyler Street and 30 Park Street.
And one thing I haven't mentioned so far on the tour is that this is the year that the city of Somerville, or I should say actually the town of Somerville, is celebrating its 175th anniversary. And since we separated from the good folks in Charlestown, we decided we wanted to be totally separate from them. They're now part of Boston, as you now know. So in lieu of, or in celebration of that, we have been trying to think of creative ways to actually celebrate it, and Ben and company has come forth with a new brew. I don't know if you have it here today, the 175th celebration brew that we actually all had and toasted on East Somerville in March sometime. So I don't know if you have any left of that. But
So almost every beer here fits into a series, and we always sort of develop things, and we're always building them. And before I make any promises, nope. Oops. Oh, right, there we go. So basically, the beer that we made was called Municipal Freedom Gives National Strength. That's great. It's not your average crowd that is going to laugh at that one without any explanation. This is the logo, the motto of the city of Somerville. And so we actually created that. We tapped the keg with Mayor Joe. And that beer, my understanding is that Mayor Joe keeps to an extent gluten-free because one of his children observes a gluten-free diet, and he's supporting the child, one of his daughters.
No, he doesn't have any daughters. He has all sons.
Sons.
Four sons.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Apologies. So Mayor Joe's one of Mayor Joe's sons is gluten-free, and so he keeps to that lifestyle. So we actually created. We technically call it gluten reduced because in beer, if you remove the gluten, then you call it gluten reduced. Whereas if you make it from non-gluten containing ingredients, it's gluten-free. So we removed the gluten from this beer and made a Somerville beer, which was sort of kind of a gift to our mayor and to this city that we're really proud of. And now, so the upshot is that there's a beer which follows that beer, which is called Sanctuary. And yeah, we get another. There we go. That's an easy one. And that actually here is a rhubarb infused saison. We call it Somerville Saison, or as Forrest calls it, the Sank City Saison. But so we have that on cask, and you guys can all try a little. The bartenders here. This is Chloe. This is Colleen. We got Erica right there. Sharon, who will be working with you guys, and Ed in a little bit. And so you can always get free tastes here, and just learn. We encourage that. You'll notice we have a crazy variety of things called Mosaic on draft right now. This is a single recipe that's fermented with 7 different strains of yeast. We're creating some new beers, and we wanted to just kind of focus in and experiment and bring everyone into the experiment. And so I guess without further ado, that's kind of our mindset, is bring people into the experiment, teach them, give them the tools to learn. And I welcome Ed and Brandon and Sharon so that everyone has the tools to learn with this man, and I'm really proud to host events like this. Welcome to our Duck Village stage right here. Welcome to Aeronaut Brewing Company, and welcome to Somerville.
Yeah, and actually, just so you know, they do some wonderful things here in bringing vendors in, and so that's how we have this food truck quasi today. I guess you're here 2 days a week, as it is on a regular basis. Is that true? Compliments is here. And then also we have something called Nibbles, which is entrepreneurs that want to be in kind of the food business. And when they start out, they actually start off as kind of this Nibbles group. This is through the Somerville Arts Council is promoting them. And so there are different, often family operations that make this wonderful food from different parts of the country. Some people might have seen on Facebook that we were going to have one of them here today, but they actually are, a lot of them are today in Union Square Farmers Market is launching for the first day today, and they're having a whole bunch of food vendors down there, so that's where they are today. But Nibbles groups, including Las Carolinas, who make these wonderful empanadas and other food and such, are also here, I understand, 2 nights a week.
All the time, man. And we have a lot of partnerships ongoing with the Somerville Arts Council and of course the Historic Commission. And they're here every Wednesday is Las Carolinas. Mondays are Mekta, which is her company is sort of a Ethiopian. I always forget the name of the delicious Ethiopian.
Oh, I see. No.
Ejiro. Yes.
Okay.
So that's what we have. We have community board game nights every single Monday. It's free here all the time. Board game nights on Monday. We have community trivia on Tuesdays where people come in and host and different kinds of stuff. Wednesdays is the Duck Village Stage, which is our recording project where we work with Scat TV to create records for local musicians. But I just wanted to get a big round of applause for Brandon Wilson.
And for Ben.
Thank you, Brandon.
So well, thank you so much. So again, as you gathered, hopefully in this tour today, this is, sort of the essence of Somerville, all the innovation and all the pioneering ways that Somerville has made its name and continues on with its rich history of innovation. And so I hope you'll stay and enjoy. Some of you have just come for the talk. You missed the walk, so it was going to be videotaped, and so you can actually watch it on online, I guess, if you don't have cable television and such. And if anybody has any questions, I will be continuing here to stay throughout the talk and thereafter. Ed Gordon will have to leave right at 1:30 precisely because he has to go to Arlington to do another walking tour. So we're going to start that very shortly. So I urge you to get some food and drink and sit down and listen. So thanks so much for coming today. Okay.
Thank you, Brandon.
Okay.
Thank you for coming out.